Hello and welcome to the Ride With Us Your 1-5 podcast. I'm Cam.
And I'm Emily. And on this episode, we have a lot to cover, but we're going to start with Syracuse men's basketball. They recently played 3 games, so we'll get into that. Starting with their game versus Northeastern, which was on Saturday, they ended up winning with a score of 76-48. The MVP of that game was Judah Mintz.
Yeah, and it's really good. He scored really well. He was very efficient, and it's very important because it shows that Boeheim trusts him. A freshman getting the keys to the team right off the bat. Point guards that are freshmen usually don't start right away. Syracuse needs more recruits like Judah because he shows that he can lead the team even though he's a freshman. And Boeheim shows that he trusts him and he's a special player and he shows it on and off the court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he ended up having 18 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and played 27 minutes, which was really good.
And like that, he's proving himself right out of the gate. And like coming out of high school, he was a 4-star recruit, the 61st prospect in his class. So he's proving himself to be the big recruit that he was. Next,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to segue into the who's hot versus who's not starters edition from the Northeastern game.
Yeah, so for hot, Judah Mintz, obviously, as we just discussed. Also, Jesse Edwards played really well. He had 19 points, 7 rebounds, and ended up playing for 24 minutes. And Joe Girard had a good game with 21 points, a rebound, 3 assists, and he also played 27 minutes.
Yeah, and those guys played good, but unfortunately, Buddy Williams had a bit of an off game 7 points, 8 rebounds in 25 minutes. I mean, being a sophomore on this such a young Syracuse team, I feel like he needs to lead more because they're so young and he's a sophomore. Like, he has experience playing and being on the team. So he needs to lead more, and with that, he needs to score more. Another player that did not play so well was Chris Bell, who had 1 assist, 3 rebounds in 12 minutes. So he didn't even get into the scoring column. I mean, being a freshman and starting right away, we expect him to do at least something. And even if it's 2 points or 4 points, I mean, he came out of high school being the 70th overall prospect in the class and a 4-star recruit. So, I mean, we have high expectations for him.
Yeah, but they did win that game, so that was good. And then they had the tournament at the Barclays Center, so they played 2 more games. So on Monday night, they played Richmond, and they won in an overtime win, 74-71. Very close game.
Yeah, a lot of blocks that game too. There was one specific play where the player from Richmond has a fast break and he's going for a layup, and Judah Mintz gets a block off the backboard, and then Richmond got the rebound, and Monir Hima came behind him and also blocked that. And then at the end of the game, Jesse Edwards had a massive block where Richmond had about 6 possessions, and Jesse Edwards had a massive block to basically save the game. Um, Talking about that Richmond last possession, there were probably 7 shots that Richmond took, and Syracuse didn't get a rebound. They missed all of the shots, obviously, because Syracuse won the game. But if they would have made that, it would have made it a 3-point game, and then Richmond could have actually had a chance to tie it. So Syracuse needs to work on the rebounding, but I'm glad that they didn't pay for not rebounding.
Mm-hmm. And Joe Girard was the MVP of that game. He had 31 points, which is actually his career high. So that's really exciting for Joe. I'm glad he, broke his own record. He had 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and he played 42 minutes. So he was on the field most of that game. And then for the who's hot, who's not in the Richmond game, obviously Joe Girard was hot. Judah Mintz played good again, 16 points, 1 rebound, 4 assists, and he played 38 minutes. And Chris Bell, we saw a good improvement from him in this game compared to Saturday versus Northeastern. He ended up having 11 points, 1 rebound, 1 assist, and he played 34 minutes. Another pretty good game for Jesse Edwards. He had 10 points, 8 rebounds, so that was great. And he played 31 minutes. Overall, good performance from him.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Benny Williams had another game where he struggled. He only had 4 points and 3 rebounds, 1 assist, and he played 40 minutes. So he was only out of the game for 5 minutes. So I'm thinking he needs some time, but maybe consider a starter switch. Maybe Quadir Copeland or Symir Torrance if they want to go small, or if they want to go bigger, maybe possibly Malik Brown starting. I know Benny is a more experienced player, but if he continues to struggle, maybe Boeheim should look for other options to start.
Yeah. So the most recent game Syracuse played was versus St. John's. They ended up losing. This final score was 76-69 in an overtime situation, which now makes Syracuse basketball 3-2. MVP of that game would have to be Jesse Edwards. He had 18 points, 8 rebounds, and he ended up playing for 27 minutes. And he ended up scoring most of his points in the second half and overtime, which is really critical and what we need these guys to do, score throughout the game. He had 4 fouls, but he was very careful not to foul out of the game. So Jesse played really well that game.
Yeah, and segmenting into the who's hot, who's not for this game. Obviously, Jesse was hot.
Yeah, and also Judah played good in the first half. Seemed like he struggled a little bit in the second, but in the first half, he did have 16 points.
And Benny Williams really picked it up this game. He had a double-double. He had 11 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists. And he played the whole game. He played 45 minutes, so he didn't get subbed out once. It was a great way to step up for him after a couple of bad performances. Chris Bell also played well again, 12 points, 1 assist in 34 minutes. And one thing that I want him to work on, though, is his rebounding. I mean, he's a big guy. He's our power forward. I mean, Jesse's great at rebounding, but Bell needs to also be able to rebound. He shouldn't get out-rebounded by somebody like Joe Girard.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And seemed like Joe Girard kind of struggled this game. He only had 4 points, 3 rebounds, and he was 1-10 with field goals that game. So his shooting game was just off. He played 38 minutes too, and like that compared to the game before where he got 31 points and broke his career record. I mean, just the inconsistency is a little shocking. I would have expected a little more from him. I understand he's probably tired, but I mean, 4 points, that's not a big contribution.
And he went into the second half scoreless, so he didn't score anything in the first half, which is crazy after coming off of a 31-point night. Another player that was not hot was Judah Mintz in the second half. We talked about how Judah was great in the first, 16 points, but he finished the game with 20 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and he was 7 for 17 for field goals in 41 minutes. And like that, the St. John's must have made a switch or something because he was basically non-existent in the second half and overtime. I mean, he had control of the game in the first half, but like the second half and overtime, he just kept turning the ball over. I mean, there were too many turnovers to count, and this is not Arby's.
Yeah. I mean, that was crazy. So unfortunately, they lost, but hopefully Saturday they play Bryant at the Dome. So hopefully they can win that game, and that will be a good game for Syracuse. Now,
another player that played great is Mounir Hima defensively, the transfer from Duquesne. He had 8 rebounds, and he tied the 4th career record for blocks in a game with 7. So he's tied with Ronnie Cycli for 4th blocks in a game in 31 minutes. So he played more than Jesse, which, I mean, Jesse was in foul trouble. I mean, so was Hima, but they both stayed out of foul trouble when they needed to. They didn't foul out. And in my personal opinion, I think Hima should have been in overtime instead of Chris Bell because of the defensive presence.
Mm-hmm. Now, transitioning from basketball, we have to talk about the Syracuse football game against Wake Forest, which they lost. Final score was 45-35, which now makes Syracuse football 6-5 record.
I mean, overall, it was a pretty good game. Garrett Schrader was 17 for 31 passing. He had 324 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Sean Tucker, 16 attempts, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he broke 3,000 rushing yards. So, I mean, those two did well. Gadsden was 6 receptions for 85 yards. And Andre Schmidt was 0 for 2 from field goal, which I find very surprising. I mean, he's one of the best kickers in the whole college. So I think that it's very surprising for him to go 0 for 2. And another thing, Michael Jones suffered an injury in the first quarter. And a quote from Dino Babers, he says he couldn't go, so it was just better to keep him out, which is quite scary for Syracuse fans and for Michael. I mean, he's the leader of that defense, so others are going to have to step up, and hopefully Michael gets better soon.
Next game Syracuse football plays is against Boston College, so hopefully they continue to play good and there's no injuries. Now, NFL Week 11, we're going to be discussing the Bills versus Browns game, which under the circumstances with all the snow in Buffalo is actually played in Detroit at the Lions Stadium. Now, the Bills did end up winning 31-23. Both of the offenses played really great that game. There were no interceptions thrown by either team.
Yeah, Buffalo overall came out on top. Josh Allen, 18 for 27 passing, 197 yards and a touchdown. He got outplayed by Jacoby Brissett, actually, which is quite surprising. Brissett was 28 for 41 passing, 324 yards, 3 touchdowns. Going back to Buffalo, Devin Singletary, 18 attempts, 86 yards, and James Cook, 11 attempts, 86 yards. So really, the running game for Buffalo is what won him the game. And also special teams. Tyler Bass was 6 for 6 from field goal, which is crazy. Going back to Cleveland, though, I mentioned Brissett, and Amari Cooper had 8 receptions, 113 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So overall, it was just the running and the special teams which led Buffalo to victory.
And for this week, game of the week, we're going to be discussing the Jets-Patriots game, where the Patriots won 10-3.
Yeah, the Patriots won on a kick return from Marcus Jones, so that was the winning touchdown. And it's actually was a great game, even though both teams played very mediocrely. The final score just shows that it was a great battle.
Yeah, and I thought this was interesting. I saw on ESPN that in the second half, the Jets averaged 2.77 inches per play. I mean, that's like this much. That's ridiculous. I mean, that is crazy. And also, because of the Jets' performance being so poor that game, the Jets manager said that they're going to be starting Mike White as quarterback instead of Zach Wilson because of his disappointing playing that game.
Yeah, I think they need to do something. I mean, the Jets have played overall well this year, but I think it's mainly because of their defense. I mean, Sauce Gardner, the rookie, has been fantastic. I mean, if he doesn't win Defensive Rookie of the Year, I don't know who will, because he's been awesome for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, the Fantasy Player of the Week. Cam, do you want to say that?
Yeah, the Fantasy Player of the Week is Tony Pollard. He had a great week in fantasy. He had 36.9 PPR fantasy points. Really rushing and receiving, he was great. So rushing, on the rushing side of the ball, he was 15 attempts, 80 yards. And receiving, he had 6 receptions, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So if you had Tony Pollard on your team in week 11, your team was looking great because he had almost 37 points. All right, now we're going to segue into our special segments. So my special segment is the sports take of the week. So my sports take of the week is that I think the Vikings are going to have a monstrous comeback week after losing 40-3 in week 11 to the Cowboys. I predict a 35-14 win over the Patriots and for Justin Jefferson to have at least 25 fantasy points. The next thing we're going to talk about is Cam's chump of the week. So this could be somebody that's made a bonehead play in sports or has just been rude overall. And this week's chump of the week is Stephen A. Cohen. And so Greg Bird played for the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders in the 2022 season. And in the middle of the year he was released, and we're big Greg Bird fans. So I started this thing to tweet at Stephen A. Cohen, who is the Mets owner, every single day until he signed Greg Bird. So I would say whatever day it was, of tweeting at Stephen A. Cohen at Mets until they signed Greg Bird. And I did this every day. And this past week, Stephen A. Cohen must have had enough because he ended up blocking me on Twitter. So that made me stop tweeting every day. So hopefully Greg Bird ends up somewhere, but Stephen A. Cohen is the chump of the week.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to hear that like that. We want Greg Bird to get signed, so we're just doing anything we can to try to get him signed. Now for my segment is Emal Show and Tell, and since we were just talking about Greg Bird, he's like one of my favorite baseball players of all time, and we saw him a few times this year, but when the Scranton came to Syracuse in, I think it was like early June, they had a series in Syracuse, I ended up going for a third out ball, and Greg Bird had the ball. So Greg Bird threw me the ball, which was very exciting. And then I thought, well, I want to get this ball signed by Greg Bird since, he gave it to me. He's like my favorite player. So I have a signed Greg Bird ball. I don't know if you can see it that great. His signature is on the bottom there. I also have a couple other people who signed it. Ronald Guzman, another player that I really like. Tim LeCastro, Syracuse legend. And then Rob Brantley and Greg Bird, of course. And also, I messaged Greg Bird for 162 days on Instagram, just trying to get him to respond to say something. But I don't think Greg's a big social media guy. I just stopped messaging him, and kind of when Cam got blocked by the chump of the week, Stephen Cohen. But we're just overall very big Greg Bird fans, and we wish him the best and would hope maybe he could get signed somewhere. That would be great.
Yeah, even if it's not a minor league or major league deal, even if he went to play somewhere else, like in a different league or the Atlantic League or something like that. We just want the best for Greg Bird, and we want to see him succeed and play somewhere. Well, yep. Thank you for watching this episode of the podcast, Vibe with 315. We hope you enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, comment if you want to see something specific, and subscribe. And we're out.